everyone's grabbed their last bacon roll and taken a seat. So bear with us a second, thank you. My colleagues might close that door in a second. Right, sit back to upright, tray table stowed, therefore take off. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. If we haven't met, I'm James Kirkup. I'm the Director of the Social Market Foundation. We are very pleased to be helping host this event in partnership with our friends at WPI Economics and CPT to talk about the decarbonisation dividend. I'll do some quick housekeeping before I run you through the running order and hand over to the more interesting people on this panel. I have to tell you that there are no fire drills planned this morning, so if the alarms do go off, then your fire exit is over there and then downstairs. In terms of the proceedings this morning, we are under a media embargo on the contents of the report that we're here to discuss until Sunday, which then leads me onto that camera over there. When we get to the Q&A session, please bear in mind that camera is currently doing a clever thing with the internet. It means that the session is being sent out on video to people who are joining us electronically. That video is not currently open to everybody, but it will be on Sunday. It will go up on YouTube. So when we get to the conversation part of the session, bear in mind you're not just talking to the people in the room, and that there is a permanent video record of the things that you're saying. So just hold that in mind. I think that's the last. Those are the only bits of housekeeping I have to do. So the running order in a second, I'll hand over to Alison from CPT, who will talk you through essentially why we're here and the work and research and project we're all here to discuss. Then next up will be Matt Oakley from WPI Economics, who also in his capacious spare time is also a senior researcher at the Social Market Foundation, hence our role here. Then over to a practitioner of transport policy, Lynne from the Greater Cambridge Partnership. And finally, we'll have a magisterial upsum and Churchill vision from the Minister, Richard Holden. Last week, housekeeping, there's a possibility that I think the Minister might just be violently extracted from the room to run over to the House of Commons if the Speaker makes the wrong decision on something. So do lose Richard, so at some point you do forgive us for that. But hopefully we'll keep him all the way through to the end. So that's us, I think. Hope you're enjoying the breakfast and the coffee. I'll hand over to Alison Edwards.
Thank you, James, and thank you everyone for joining us here today. CPT are very proud to be sponsoring this event. So as James said, I'll give a bit of background as to why we're here today. So back in the summer, we held a similar event to launch WPI's report, The Decarbonisation Dividend. And that report highlighted the importance of switching out some carbon-intensive car journeys for bus and coach journeys if we are going to stand any chance of meeting our net zero carbon targets. The report also explained how making millions of small changes can make a really, really big difference. So just to put that into context, if everyone just switched out one car journey a month to bus or coach by the end of the decade, or 2 journeys a month by 2050, that could make a really, really big difference to our ability to meet our net zero carbon targets, as well as unlocking a whole host of other important benefits for our economy, for our air quality, for our health, and for our local communities. And what's more, a recent report published by Stagecoach shows that people are actually up for making a change, and they're looking to their local councils to lead the way. So over the summer, following the launch of the decarbonisation dividend, we teamed up with the Social Market Foundation to run a series of roundtables with a wide variety of stakeholders to talk about how we can encourage people to think and, more importantly, to act a little bit differently when it comes to the choices they make about how they travel. And a key theme that emerged from that was the need for a package of measures which both improves the public transport offer to people, but also just makes the option of the car a little bit less attractive when considering those options. And again, the Stagecoach report, which surveyed members of the public, also showed that that was the way to go. So WPI Economics have then taken the important findings from those roundtables and they've combined it with some really detailed economic analysis to come up with a package of policy options which can help all of us to achieve the changes that we need if we're going to meet our shared ambitions. Now, the bus and coach industry, we absolutely understand that we are essential to both tackling the climate emergency and meeting our net zero carbon goals, as well as helping us with economic growth and levelling up across the country. And we stand ready to play our part, but we can't do it on our own. And that's why we're really looking forward to working with all the UK governments, with business, with a wide variety of stakeholders, with all of you sitting here today to get us to make the changes that we need to see in the way that we travel. So on that basis, I'll hand back to James.
Thank you very much, Alison. And actually, yeah, Alison's reminding me there by talking about all the development stuff. I think this is not the only launch event we're doing. We will be launching and discussing this work also in Cardiff and Edinburgh in the early part of next year as well. So if anyone feels like joining us again in another part of the UK, we'll hope to see you there too. With that unionist bit of advertising, I will hand over to my friend and colleague Matt Oakley, who I think we've actually treated some slides as well. So is the clicker working yet?
No, but my button is.
The button that we had a clicker issue earlier on, but Matt's button is working. Press your button, you go, Matt.
So thank you from us for being here too. Before kicking off, I want to say a huge thanks to Andre, second row, for the bulk of the work behind this project, and also to there's an industry and the wider stakeholders that contributed to the roundtables and our thinking, which really informed and helped us take forward this work. I'm going to recap a bit, a few slides just on the first report, which outlines, I guess, the motivation behind what we're doing, and then talk about the results from the second stage, which really focused in on how we actually might achieve a shift from car to bus and coach. So the first report, those of you that were here will remember my inability to remember these three words from last time. But moving journeys from car to bus is necessary, desirable, and possible. Necessary because it's going to be a key part to ensuring the transition to net zero, but also a just transition to net zero. Desirable because that transition then comes with significant benefits beyond the environmental benefits. So in terms of the economy, health, air quality, for instance, and possible because we saw public opinion, and I think the Stagecoach report that Alison was talking about shows us again that based on what we know about public opinion and public attitudes, it's possible to get the kind of shifts that we're talking about. So we took that framework and that thinking and looked at what might be required in order to get to for bus and coach to support our journey to net zero. What we found was essentially bus patronage in GB increasing by a little more than 80% in 2050 relative to 2018-19 terms. That sounds like quite a lot. It is quite a lot. But as Alison was saying, in practical terms, that's lots and lots of very small changes. So just over 2 car trips per month per person by 2050. So we kind of left you there last time, saying that was what was needed in order for bus and coach to support the journey to net zero. What I think we've looked at now is that feels like it's probably quite easy, but actually it comes in the context of quite a long period of decline in bus patronage and the distance travel on bus and coach. So the chart here shows an average decline of 11% per decade over the last 2 decades in distance travel by bus and coach, compared to the red line, which is what we'd need in the future, which would be a 25% increase per decade. So really, I think what this report is about showing how that can be possible, the sorts of measures that might be needed, and how we can work together really to make that kind of 25% increase per decade a reality. The starting point is that the current policy landscape is not going to be enough. There's obviously been a much needed and welcomed investment in bus recently. So the National Bus Strategy outlined that. Only 31 of the 76 local transport authorities have received funding from that, and none of them have received everything they thought they needed. Approximately 1.6 billion invested today, as I said, very much welcome and needed. But based on our modelling, what we found is that if that were repeated in a way we might expect over the course of time to 2050, actually it would achieve only around 10% of the total modal shift or shift from car to bus and coach that we would need to deliver net zero by 2050. That leaves, as you see here, quite a significant gap, which would need to be filled by something. So how do we fill that gap is essentially the starting point for this report. We looked firstly then at two fairly obvious options. Could we just make motoring, travelling by car, more expensive? I think our view is that this is not a viable option in the scale that we needed. So if you're going to close that gap I showed on the last slide, you need to increase the overall cost of motoring in England by 3.25% in real terms a year up to 2050, or in cumulative terms 137% in real terms. So really significantly increasing the cost of motoring if you're going to drive modal shift just through that to fill the gap. So I will leave the politics to Richard, but I think most people would agree that that's probably not going to be a politically salient thing to sell to the population. So we decided that probably wasn't the way to go. The other thing we thought was free buses, and could we incentivise people to switch to bus by making buses free? The challenge here is this is really expensive. So we estimate around £110 billion up to 2050, or nearly £4 billion a year of cost. And that actually drives a relatively modest level of modal shift, so achieving only around 11% of the modal shift that's required. And that might sound strange that it costs a lot but doesn't achieve as much as you might think. But that's because you're basically providing a very large benefit to people who are already using the buses. So you're not driving the kind of modal shift that we need. You're actually spending quite a lot on subsidising existing users. So the conclusion that we reached, and this was shared across the roundtables we hosted, that delivering modal shift can't just be about single policies. What we need is a package of complementary measures that support each other and really work together in order to drive the modal shift needed. What might that package of measures look like? We looked at 4 different areas. One, increasing the attractiveness of the bus network, so investing to make services quicker, more regular, improving the experience whilst on bus and coach. Secondly, making buses cheaper, but in a much more targeted way, so trying to target people who may shift journeys. Thirdly, discouraging using cars, which we talked about a bit already. And then fourthly, underpinning all those things, behavioural interventions which seek to work with those 3 policies in order to influence consumer choices. It's worth noting we don't do an awful lot of modelling on that 4th area. In fact, we don't do any modelling on that 4th area, but I think our view is that if you're going to make this a success, you need to have that kind of approach to support the policies we're talking about. We looked at, that's probably too small for you, but we looked at a whole range of policies in terms of how effective they might be, working with the CPT team to, compile a long list, which you'll see in the annex of the report, and then selecting a selection of those to do some modelling behind. Some of the ones we've looked at here in terms of increasing the attractiveness of bus network, we've looked at essentially taking the investment that's been done so far and being much more ambitious with it. So essentially going to fund everything that was asked for by each of the local transport authorities, and seeing what that would look like in terms of the impacts. So looking at the making the bus cheaper, we've looked at a salary sacrifice scheme, so much like kind of childcare vouchers or That's that sort of thing where you people in work are basically tax incentivized to take the bus, and also looked at a £2 fare cap for single journeys. So looking at what that would look like in the future. Then discouraging the use of cars, we focused on a low scenario, so a less ambitious scenario, which is a congestion charge for urban centres. So looking at, I guess, kind of the biggest towns and cities in the UK, in England, and that would affect around 7.5% of local traffic in those areas. And then looking at a comprehensive charging zone in those same areas, which would cover more like 75% of traffic in those areas. So a fairly comprehensive charging zone. In terms of what that might achieve, the biggest impact we've estimated would be from the increasing the attractiveness of bus networks, so the investment or providing the kind of level of investment that's been asked for. So we're talking about here a £30 billion investment in bus service and infrastructure, and that would deliver over 6 billion additional bus journeys each year. So a really, really significant increase in bus patronage there. Salary sacrifice and the £2 cap lead to a modest increase in bus journeys from modal shift, and as they contribute to supporting that investment. And then similarly on the making car trip less desirable, the smaller, less ambitious one option delivers relatively little, so 25 million fewer car journeys, but much more, obviously, with the more comprehensive charging zone. We're talking about 250 million fewer car journeys per year. Excuse me. So those are the broad kind of impacts that we might expect. What would that deliver in total? So we estimate that a combination of three of those policies, so the ambitious investment at £2 fare cap and the comprehensive congestion charge zone, would deliver around 75% of the modal shift that we estimated to be required. We think that combined with wider changes to the planning system and wider transport system, more targeted support potentially, and also those effective behaviour change campaigns that I talked about, we think there's a very good chance that those sorts of policies could get us to the point where we're achieving the level of modal shift that we need. Interesting also, the example package would be revenue raising for the Exchequer, so mainly through the charging zone. So this is a self-funding. This is not a request for, I guess, net spending by the government. This is self-funding and also provides extra money which could support net zero policies and provide more targeted support to those who perhaps need to use cars the most. In terms of the wider benefits, I think we're sat on this slide, so I will leave you to have a look and peruse the slide for yourselves. But essentially, as per the previous report, really significant additional benefits here in terms of the benefits that the modal shift could actually lead to. So my final slide, I think hopefully what we've shown is that this is quite a big challenge. There's small changes needed for a lot of people, but that is on the basis of a decline over time over the previous few decades. And doing that is going to require us to work in partnership. We finished the report with a set of principles for how that might be taken forward. Summarised here that modal shift can't be piecemeal. It needs to be part of an ambitious strategy. It needs to be fully integrated with other measures to reduce the use of private cars. Needs to be, importantly, placed on a firm financial footing, and that investment is needed and need to be committed over the long term. Also need to think about how this works in different localities. So different sorts of packages will be needed in different areas where there are different sorts of users. And finally, that means that it requires a holistic package of interventions. So just relying on one lever is not going to be enough. We need to combine a range of different measures to really make a difference here. And if we do that, we think it's possible. And hopefully, you guys and us can work with CPT to do that.
Thank you very much. And the flyer that Matt mentioned is on the seats. On the other side of the helpful graphic, there's a QR code that will take you to the WPI report, which we got story there. Our next speaker is Lynne, who's a practitioner, trying to do these things in the real world in Cambridge. So, your thoughts on how to unlock the decarbonisation dividend in reality in Cambridge? Possibly not with a working microphone. Shall we?
Hi, how are you?
Have mine.
Oh, look at me, I'm surrounded. Okay. Fabulous. Maybe I'll just use one of them. Let's see how we do. So I just wanted to give you a little view on the ground. It's really interesting to hear the remarks. I will be looking forward to reading the whole report. I think that what we're doing in Cambridge has picked up quite a few of those threads. So I wanted to talk a little bit about policy package that is currently out for consultation in Greater Cambridge, with a focus on achieving that mode shift from car to public transport. The background that we've got in Greater Cambridge, and by Greater Cambridge I mean the city itself and the sort of surrounding ring of villages and market towns that make up its commuter zone. There are expected to be about 35,000 more residents in Greater Cambridge by 2021 than there were in 2011. There's huge job growth coming to 2031, driven by the sort of success of life sciences, of tech, the knowledge economy in and around Cambridge, springboarding off that innovation cluster that's there and from the university. Most of those jobs are coming on the periphery of the city. It's a historic city. Lots of you are probably familiar with it. And so essentially we've got a sort of context of growth which is both blessing and curse in Cambridge. It's constrained growth by Greenbelt around the city itself and by the sort of shape of the city and by the historic core of the city. It makes your suite of options for public transport quite challenging. In 2014, Greater Cambridge signed a city deal with central government whereby it was agreed that one of the biggest barriers to growth in Cambridge was transport and the lack of ability to get people to work in this area. So with all these 44,000 jobs, at the moment most of them commute by car, and the sort of request from business at the time was, you have to help us support this growth because we can't get people to work in this context. In the meantime, people that live and work in Greater Cambridge spend an average of 23 days a year sitting in traffic. And they are sort of telling us that it's miserable, it's not a good life. People can't guarantee to get home from work to pick up their kids, people miss hospital appointments. It's really terribly congested and sort of a victim of its own success. So the city deal was struck on the basis of £500 million to 2030 to be match funded by sort of local funding, levered in through development, to £1 billion of investment over the period. The majority of that is programmed for spend on sort of capital projects. We've got a programme of busways and so forth, which is supporting bringing people in from that rural hinterland into the city. But with the last tranche of it, the intention is that we use that to front fund a sustainable travel zone, which will support the improvement of public transport in the area. And the intention is that this is a big and bold policy to tackle the net zero challenge, the congestion challenge, the air quality challenge, but also really importantly to support equality in Cambridge. Cambridge is a successful city, but also an unequal one, as is often the case with economically successful places. There are an awful lot of people already there living in transport poverty who don't have access to a car, who don't currently have access to very good public transport routes, and who don't have a great deal of alternative. We have been canvassing opinion with the public for several years since the city deal was instituted, including running a series of in-principle conversations about, is this a problem that you want to solve? What are the types of measures that you'd be interested in? We ran a citizens' assembly in 2019, which spent a couple of weekends with experts and with a demographically representative sample of the public, working through the issues and the policy responses. And based on all of that, we've come forward with this package. The package is threefold. It starts with transforming the bus network, which is the core of public transport in Greater Cambridge. There's mainline rail, but there's no mass transit system, and no great potential for one because it's a small city where it's difficult to make schemes like that stack up, and because the urban core is incredibly tight and historic, and it makes it difficult to do significant segregation. So transforming the bus network through more services, longer operating hours, more routes, flat rate fares of a £1 hopper within the city and a £2 flat rate to come into the city from outside. Second element is a lot more investment in sustainable travel schemes, including the maintenance of things like cycleways and things like secure cycle storage, which we know in the area is a really important deterrent to active travel, actually is sort of poorly maintained infrastructure where it exists, and the risk of bike theft, which is endemic in Cambridge. And those first two things are inextricably linked to the third element, which is the sustainable travel zone in which you pay to drive. So it's a road user charge with the revenue ring-fenced legally for transport. And we've suggested a range of discounts and exemptions that will apply to this, coming back to that issue of inclusivity. So most of the capex from the city deal goes to infrastructure, but you need something for that last element for a couple of reasons. One is that segregated busway schemes coming into the city work well until they get to the periphery of the city, and then you just need to get some of the cars out of the way, otherwise the buses can't be reliable and they can't be high quality because they're sitting in the same traffic as everyone else. And the other is that to underpin that shift to public transport support, you need a revenue stream, and this provides that. So from as early as the end of next year, subject to political decision making, we might start to phase in some of those transport improvements, and then it sort of ramps up over time with a road user charge coming in potentially from 25-26 in the peak, and then the following year all day. But some significantly improved sort of bus route network maps. I should say that the plan is also to serve the rural hinterland by demand responsive transport, because there's a lot of sort of low density rural housing where it may not be possible to serve with scheduled services. And that's the size of the zone. So as you'll see, this is a fairly bold change, and it is intended to provoke a sort of a step change in the ability to get into and move around Cambridge. So as currently proposed, we're out to public consultation at the moment. It covers the entire urban area of the city. You'll see those little blue dots around the edge. Those are existing park and ride sites, all of which would be outside the zone, which gives the driver a fairly simple and fairly sort of clear choice. You stop and you park and you get on public transport, or you carry on and you pay. We estimate that this will reduce car trips by 50% in the city in the peak. We estimate that it will give us a revenue stream of about £50 million a year, and that's really important for that ongoing revenue stream. And we estimate it will cause a 40% increase in public transport usage and 60,000 more active travel use. So that's the timeline there per the consultation. We're out to consultation until Christmas, decisions during next year, potentially starting bringing those improvements from the end of next year, beginning of next year, ramping up to a full all day, 7 AM to 7 PM, Monday to Friday, road user charge in 27-28. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Lynne. Perfect introduction to our final speaker, the Minister for not just buses, but local transport and roads.
Well, thank you very much indeed, James, and it's a delight to be here today, and also to be with the Social Market Foundation, Federation of Passenger Transport with you, Alison, and also to hear that really interesting example of what's happening in the devolved administrations across the country who are going to face individual challenges in different places and with their own solutions. I'm glad that in Matt's look at things with the helpfully assisted by Andre, they didn't decide to go on either driving costs through the roof or a completely free bus option. I don't think either of which would have been a politically acceptable move, but it's interesting to see some of the other things that they've come up with. My first visit, actually, as a minister, was to the Eurobus Expo in Birmingham the day after I was appointed. So buses is very much at the core of what I'm looking at within the department. And also it is at the heart of, there's a huge amount of decarbonisation work going on in that space at the moment. And it's been great to see some British firms at the forefront of that too, helping create some of those jobs we want to see in the country on the back of it as well in next generation manufacturing, particularly in places like Scotland and Scarborough and Northern Ireland as well, where there's major manufacturers there too. And buses and coaches do play an enormously important role in helping people connect, and they're incredibly important to places. And at the centre of most of our public transport networks, making 4.5 billion journeys in England, and even during the pandemic years. They bring people to jobs, also to education opportunities, particularly important for FE as well. And they're absolutely vital local services that really do liberate people within their areas, particularly old people, young people, disabled people, and those who are isolated. I know I couldn't have got to my first job, which was as a waiter in a bar in my local market town without a bus service, and I know how important that was for me and my independence. I'm particularly glad to be here from the Department of Transport and talking about buses and roads, because so much of the time we end up talking about rail, but actually 95% plus of all journeys are made by road, whether that's bus, coach, minibus, or car and motorbike as well. So it's the concentration on bus routes is particularly important, I think. And they're also important, as everybody's been talking about, in that transition to achieving net zero and driving the transformational green agenda. And I really do think that you can already see that they save millions of tons of carbon a year, and prevent probably extra thousands of miles of traffic jams too. We have had some short-term issues in this sector, driver shortage being one of them. And I was at DFT speaking to people yesterday, and including to some of the devolved administrations as well. And it's been good to see us working together on issues which affect us across the UK, as decarbonisation of transport affects us across the UK and our major cities too. And as the report points out, buses can play a much bigger role in our transport network. How getting to that point is going to require, as everybody's pointed out, reversing that real long-term decline in bus usage, and also, to be honest, challenging some negative perceptions of buses too. We have to be realistic about where we are at the moment, particularly following COVID-19, which has compounded some of the problems with our nation's buses, caused a significant drop-off in ridership, and intensified some of the challenges to an operating model that was already contending with difficult circumstances. And one of the things I've seen in my own constituency, and is increasingly borne out across the country, is particularly in older customers, ridership is down, and you can bear in mind as well they have in large part free bus passes too. It is a real concern. We have supported that system a lot through the pandemic, and even recently with the cash going through to March next year. But we have to see a shift in order to prevent that more systemic decline. Therefore, our sort of transport decarbonisation, it's all doom and gloom like that, right? There is a transport decarbonisation plan at the government, and the government has set out the importance of more public transport, in addition to cycling and walking, which active travel more generally, which my colleague Minister Norman is looking into. And we want to make cycling, walking and short journeys on public transport the natural first choice wherever practical, particularly in our towns and cities. And in the national bus strategy, we do set out a big goal of getting more people travelling by bus. To make buses the first choice, we're going to have to deliver a service that the public wants. We must make buses more frequent, more reliable, easier to understand and use, and better coordinated and cheaper. I just think of my own constituency, and I've got multiple bus operators, some of whom don't work very well together, and we're going to have a better approach. And I think actually BSIP should really help people get there. I'll just go into that a little bit more in a second. We've already taken action to improve. One of them is BSIPs working with the local transport authorities in England. That's and Matt was right that not all everyone's got extra funding, but we have provided over £1 billion for that. But all of them do have their BSIPs aren't just about they're not just bids for money. They're also plans for the future in regarding what they're going to deliver. So even those who haven't got funding at this stage, and there may be extra funding in the future, they do have a transport plan to work towards, in which they're working with the department on, which I think is also very important. We've also set out how planning of bus services will be reformed through ensuring local services delivered for passengers through the bus strategy. And as part of the BSIP plan, everybody knows that people are going down enhanced partnership or franchising models. So much of the issue you see, particularly with local councils, working with independent operators, those have not been joined up enough. And for many areas, the enhanced partnerships will provide a major change. I think of my own county in County Durham, where too often it's political decisions driving some routes rather than actually serving customers. And I hope that the enhanced partnerships will really make an improvement there. And we also need to encourage, and this is probably the heart of it really, a greater collaboration across the board between bus operators and the local transport authorities. That's going to be a major. If we can break that and make that and drive that change, we're going to be in a much better place. But I think one of the big things that we've already looked at, and it's mentioned in Matt's presentation, is that we need to get people back on buses and incentivise people to do that. And our funding through the LTAs it does introduce measures to reduce fares. I'm sure that, everybody will agree that the £60 million putting forward for the first 3 months next year to help introduce a single £2 cap in many services in England outside London will be an important step on that. And I really want to, I keep speaking to the bus companies about this, we have to get that ridership up. And I think that's going to be an important step towards driving that. And not only will it help people get back onto buses, we're doing it in a way which helps save people money. And if that, and hopefully that will drive further success in the future. Furthermore, and I know it's only a temporary scheme, but it's something that we need to look at the moment because we've seen such a fall in bus ridership recently. And that's got to be allied, and I'm speaking to my department at the moment about a broader campaign to try and, particularly for people who are older and isolated and feeling that they're not yet willing to make those journeys following the pandemic, to look at ways we can encourage people to get out and get active, particularly when it comes to the new year. Furthermore, I know how important easy and convenient ticketing is. I was surprised when I was I travelled by bus in my own constituency recently that some services it was still only cash only, and you can't use notes. So we have to get to a system where where services are accessible to everybody and usable by everybody. And for those travelling in London, you've seen the benefits of integrated ticketing for years. I remember Oyster coming in several years after I'd visited my little brother who was working out in Hong Kong, which they had octopus out there, and I thought that was magical out there. And they came here, yet we're still in some parts of the country we're still not there yet, and that's a vitally important thing to do. The National Bus Strategy just set out an ambition that all areas should enjoy similar ticketing and a similar experience to Londoners. That is absolutely vital to get people back on our buses. And I'm pleased that some operators have made it important progress, and we need to go further in implementing multi-operator pilot schemes. My constituency is a perfect example where we're stuck between Arriva and Go North East. If you want to integrate the two, it has been very difficult at times. The next challenge is taking things further, and we will support local operators and service providers to explore how we can do this. We do face a lot of uncertainty in this sector for this winter, but me and my team in the department are really committed to buses and engaging with the sector about how we deal with the long-term challenges and also the short-term challenges immediately the sector faces, and to how we can best support our transport system, and particularly the bus sector, to not only recover now from the pandemic, but then in future years, how we can really see it thrive and deliver for the communities, and particularly the towns and villages across the country that we all seek to serve.
Thank you very much, Reza. We have about 15 minutes for questions from you. Before I go to what you think about your question, I'm actually the chair prerogative and ask a question to the Minister before we come to you, which is, Richard, I'm just reflecting, your very first thing you said, Matt's very good report, was about the political viability of some of the interventions needed here. And that report, as you heard from Matt, talks about increasing the attractiveness of the bus network, which we talked about a lot. But the other component of it is essentially providing a gentle nudge to people to get out of the car. to make costs of car travel a little bit less comfortable. And I just think, I mean, what do you make of that analysis that needs to be a little bit of both? And where do you think the balance needs to lie between increasing the attractiveness of buses versus, you know, slightly making cars less comfortable?
I think the key thing has to be on attractiveness here. I mean, we're looking at and attractiveness, simplicity, ticketing, more accessibility, easier to understand routes. All of that stuff can be done and is relatively easy win without trying to drive penalising motorists. If I could, you know, I have no idea at the moment how much it costs for me to get to Crook or to Bishop Auckland or to Durham on a bus in my area. And when Deborah, who works in my office, told me it cost £2.10 to make a 1.5 mile journey from Ledgate to Concert the other day, she said, well, in that case, I'm just going to take, you know, when she went on, she's just going to take her car. She needs that simplicity and advance. And often what we do is we drive people towards the most expensive first interaction with the bus, which is traditionally been a single fare, and that's often people's first interaction. So we need to get away from that, which is why I think the £2 nationwide cap on fixed single fares to break that barrier to entry is such an important first step. And if we can, we'll see how that works. I know the Secretary of State and I have talked extensively about buses over the last few weeks. Sorry, it's, you know, this is an area we are very interested in, but we've got to start by making buses an attractive option so that people feel that there's something that they want to do rather than they're being forced to do.
It's a sequencing question. Tracking this first and then also. Maybe in the third, fourth row's hand went up first. Tell us who you are, and we have ferocious chair and demand questions, not speeches. So
thank you. It's Sylvia Barrett from Confederation Transport. My question is to the Minister, really, in terms of increasing the attractiveness of buses and driving more people to return to the bus. My worry is that something that you didn't mention is that we're seeing bus services being cut extensively across the country. Every day we're reading articles about services being cut in specific councils and even operators pulling out from whole areas. And local authorities obviously cannot step in and fill that gap.
And the question
is, even with while the £2 cap will be welcome in adjusting that perception of the cost of buses, if people cannot use the bus because it's no longer there, how do you propose to increase ridership and prevent further decline in the network?
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to get ridership up. That's one of the key things. It's going to be very difficult for either central government or local authorities to provide increasing subsidies for services that people aren't using. That's why we've got this really big push in the new year on ridership. You have to get them, and it has to be allied for working age people with, I think it's a simple £2 fare cap is a good way to go on that. And we've also got to ally it with trying to get particularly pensioners who have seen the biggest drop off in bus usage, trying to get them back onto the bus network. Those two things have got to be working together. Otherwise, you start to flip it on its head. And if we have to get to a point where people are actually using the network as it is now, in order for then the BSIPs and other stuff, which is all about more frequency, lower costs, and more services to be able to start delivering. Otherwise, people will start coming to me and saying, can we adjust our BSIPs to actually just try and sustain as much as what's there? I want to see something ambitious and growing for the future, and that does not mean that cannot mean we just subsidise decline, and we have to look for something positive, which is one of the main drivers behind the £2 scheme.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to their left-hand side again next. I'll let you caught my there, then I will come to the on this side of the aisle.
Hi there, my name is Lindsay from the Conservative Environment Network. Just to kind of follow up on your point, James, and possibly one for Lynne and Matthew. How would, I suppose, local road use charging and the kind of disincentivising car use match up with a national pay-as-you-drive scheme, which is essentially where we're likely to be heading bearing in mind the drop in VED and fuel duty from the electric vehicle charge, and how would that impact public transport?
Right, I'm going to demand an answer from the Minister on that point, but we'll come to him last, give him a chance to compose his evasions on the point of national road charge. I'll go to Lynne. Do you want to talk this first as a practitioner of local road charging? Have you any thoughts on how integrated work before I go to tertiary? Lynne.
Yeah, I'm really happy to. I mean, I think it's sort of worth underlining in terms of the previous question about that sort of chicken and egg vicious cycle of buses which are struggling and don't have the income, and then losing passengers and losing income. It is definitely there. You do need something to arrest that vicious cycle of decline. And the reason that we're proposing things we are in Cambridge is that we have a chance with the city deal, which allows us to front fund the improvements for 3 or 4 years before any charge comes in, to sort of get in there and reverse a cycle that otherwise is incredibly difficult to do because the money isn't there. So we set aside 50 million from the city deal to front fund the improvement. So as the Minister says, the attractiveness is there, the fares are down, we can start to tackle some of the integrated ticketing, we can start to put on more regular services, and then a charge comes in later to pick up the funding of that into the long term, and that gives us a sort of sustainability then of that. In terms of the interface with national road pricing, I will let the Minister comment on that. But I think what we felt strongly in Cambridge, and I know that the elected members there feel, is that for the entirety of my 20-something year career in economic growth and public transport, we've always been 10 years away from national road pricing. And truthfully, it's a really difficult thing to do. And so I make no comment on that, but from a city's point of view, it feels like cities have been at the forefront of driving the response to net zero. There are some things which are easier to do locally in response to local circumstances. If and when anything comes along that is national we need to fit into, then we'll need to work out how that plugs together. But for now, there's this sort of once in a generation opportunity for us to use the city deal funding to actually generate something where we can be more locally autonomous. And for us, the concern would be that if we do this locally, we can ring fence, and in fact, we're legally required to ring fence the money for public transport. A national scheme potentially wouldn't have that, and we certainly wouldn't be able to control the money that went into Cambridge's bus network. And so for us, that's why better to act now and not to wait.
I should say,
I couldn't say it better. I think that's fine.
We've always been 10 years away from national road pricing. We've always been only a few months away from a think tank report making the case. The recent report was probably published by the Social Market Foundation last year, so we have half of it to read it, but actually does have a bearing on this point, because what we found in the opinion research we did for that work was that actually it's probably more popular than some politicians think it could be when compared to the status quo, because people really don't like the current system of VED and the rest of it. But also what we did find is that actually we think that there could be a political backing for national road charging if it was national. People don't like the idea of variable rates and mismatch of charges across the country. I think the overall answer to this is huge. I've sat here, pretty literally here, and in other rooms over several years and talked to people in all parties involved in transport who I know privately think that someday we're going to have to go for a real review charging, but nobody wants to be the first person to say it publicly. I'm not going to put you on the spot. I'm just wondering how can we find a healthy use of way we're discussing this. Do you think in your lifetime of mine we will see a system of national road user charging introduced in the UK?
I'll see something different to what we've got today, because we're not going to be using petrol in the same way. I don't know exactly what it's going to be. These are, in the end, roads, taxpayers via petrol, diesel, VED pay, 30 billion quid a year into the exchequer, which is the equivalent of 5.5–6p on a basic rate of income tax. That is a huge amount of money. You've seen the changes already announced by the Chancellor regarding electric vehicles, which will come in a couple of years. It has been talked about for so long, but we're just going to leave it to that, I'm afraid. It really is a matter for the Treasury.
Matter for the Treasury.
Although I would just point out to the Treasury, we are, given I also oversee in my role DVLA, they are incredibly efficient at collecting BED and also very good at auctioning off number plates, which also returns hundreds of millions of pounds a year to the Exchequer. So, and anything more that they can be given to do, I'm sure they'll be willing to do it on behalf of the nation.
Thank you. There are two gentlemen on this side. The gentleman there and then there. Thank you all. Toby Park from the Behaviour Insights team. So my question, unsurprisingly, relates to the behaviour intervention component, I guess primarily to Matt, anyone as well who respond. So I'm pretty familiar with the literature on ownership and behaviour perspective. Changing about cars is extremely difficult. The things that tend to work tend to be things like big service improvements, infrastructure improvements, and road pricing and so on. So firstly, I'm curious to know how much of the modal shift model you pinning on that behavioural component as second. Quickly, second, two things that do tend to work are parking, so making parking more expensive and less available, particularly at places of employment, and also discouraging people from becoming drivers in the first place. So just curious if you follow that, those cohort effects as we go up to 2050, and when you looked at the parking prices, probably what Matt and possibly Lynne on, I don't know, but
So,
and the big old second point, it's not your question.
So there's no modelling of that at all. So the 75% does not include any of that. So I think our argument is you get to fill up some of that gap that's left if you did some more behavioural intervention type stuff to support the policies we have talked about. So really, I guess I'll push them back to you to say, how can you fill it for 25% with your behavioural stuff?
25% if you're looking at softer behaviour.
On the road charge, on the parking, we did look at parking, I think looking at Andre, but I can't remember where we got to. But yeah, we looked at a whole host of different policies. I think what we, and then we'll say about what I do. Essentially, what we envisage is that different places will have different sorts of approaches based on where they are, the types of travellers, the types of journeys they need to shift, and that's why it needs to be really tailored and focused on specific areas where the devolution agenda being really important for that to ensure that you're driving decisions locally and getting behind for that.
We did think about this locally as well. So there are a couple of things to say there. One is that I agree with you. For the soft behavioural interventions, it doesn't seem like you're going to get massive changes in that way. All of the evidence that we looked at on behaviours tells us that habits are really hard to shift. You need to get them at the beginning when people are making them, to the point at which people make education, work and housing choices. In the absence of that, you need a stick. And road pricing is an element of a stick. It needs to go alongside a carrot, for all the evidence is the carrot doesn't work on its own. On parking, you can have a really interesting conversation about this, and I would actually put it in the same bracket as things like low traffic networks, where you effectively sort of do modal filtering or you close roads. You have really bluntly got two options, haven't you? You can use pricing as your behavioural stick, or you can just sort of ban or close things.
Annoy people out of their cars.
Yeah, ban them. Yeah. There are a couple of reasons that we didn't go down the road of parking. Firstly is that in our sort of lead-up consultations on the principles, people liked that a lot less. The public liked that a lot less than road pricing, which I have to say surprised me. But I think it leaves you that element of choice, right? You can always still choose on a given day to drive if you're prepared to pay, whereas if you close roads or if you remove parking, you can't. We did look at a workplace parking levy. It raises money which you can invest, which is a really good thing, but the behavioural impact is really low, mostly because employers don't pass it on to their employees in general. And so you don't get the space on the road that you need. It's a really important part of making the space on the road, because buses cannot be attractive when they're sitting in traffic using cars. So you can have all the Wi-Fi on board and the end taking you want, but they need to be attractive. And so that's why we do that parking. And the final thing is, I didn't talk about this very much, we are really trying to think hard about where the rubber hits the road in terms of that scheme, in terms of making it fair. So our intention is to give people a genuine choice by making the network better, but making sure those people that need to drive can drive and aren't being unfairly penalised. So we're consulting on quite a large range of exemptions. So as you might expect, blue badge holders, people that are doing social care, people that are visiting A&E, people that are clinically vulnerable and can't go on public transport or need repeated hospital trips. We're trying to take care of that in a way that actually sort of parking bans and things like that, those are very blunt tools from an equalities perspective. And so we're just trying to feel our way through that. Sorry.
No.
Sorry, James. I just wanted to say on that. We heard. I don't know if anybody else heard Professor Martin Green on LBC last night talking about carers coming into London. That is something that I'm glad that Lynne has mentioned already for her scheme, because I think in my part of the world, I've got so many people who will do lots of domiciliary care jobs or district nurses who have to travel by car. I've seen multiple people over the course of the day, and we have to think of whenever these schemes are being looked at by local authorities, and they are local authority led, essentially to sign. We essentially have a legal sign off similar to a planning consent by the DFT. People have to, on a local level, really consider these issues because they are hugely important to people and have potentially massive impacts on their incomes, and have already some of the lowest paid workers in the country. So I think we need to be very careful about those impacts and mitigations that need to be thought of and put in place as well.
Thank you. Your last question is gentleman here, and then we'll time to wrap up.
Hi, Dan Hayes from Zemo Partnership. A question around zero emission buses. Part of the attractiveness moving to zero moving to buses should be about moving to zero emission help out as well. Do you have a view as to when the next round of funding will come out from the DFT for zero emission bus funding? And Lynne, do you have any plans to move your sustainable zone to zero emission zone, or is that out of the question?
Lynne, can I take the question first? I'm going to give the last word to Mr. Lynne, we'll wrap up.
When we're doing our auctioneering, we looked at a clean air zone rather than a congestion charge zone. There are two reasons we didn't. One is an equalities reason, which is that in general, more affluent people are more likely to have lower emissions vehicle, and so effectively find people sort of buying their way into exemption. And so that didn't seem fair for low income people. And the other is that we are seeking to achieve net zero, but also solve congestion and improve the bus network. And so, net zero might be achieved through electric vehicles, but solving congestion won't be.
And last word, really, Richard.
Well,
general.
Yes, on zero emission buses, so Tara from my private office is here, who has been working with me a lot on buses. She is buses in my team, and we've been kicking around quite a few ideas kicking the very large tyres on the zero emission bus plan over the last few months. We've already got, I think, from our latest PQ response, around some of 2,400 buses net zero across the UK already. It might even be higher than that now with the extra ones coming in London. We want to do more in that space, and obviously we want to look at all different options as well. I can't give you a timetable, but it's something believe me, I am actively looking at and requesting lots and lots of information on in order to get the best value for the taxpayer, but also deliver as green as possible solutions which are going to work in the long term.
Thank you very much. Now we are terrible sharing from me. We're about 3 minutes over time, so I really should bring us to a close there by really just say thank you all very much for coming. Hopefully you'll scan that file you've got, read it, engage with the report. But all it makes me do is ask you to thank not just the panel for all the recommendations, but also the Speaker of the House of Commons for not calling this in the chamber somewhere. So with that, thank you all.